distinguished mortals, to this spirited seance. I hope you're ready to pay your respects. We're about to enjoy the company of some rather restless souls. Before our seance begins, please take this moment to unwrap any coffin drops you may have buried in your pockets. I sense a medium at large, but she will stay in your midst only if you remain quietly seated at all times. And now, I believe some thunderous clapping from you will cause her to appear. Kindly welcome Kim Irvine.
Creepies and crawlies, toads in a pond, summon the ghoulies from regions beyond. Ghosts must have riders, words must be heard, stories must be told. We hang on every word. Send in a message, O Requiem Bell. Welcome the spirits of Jason Sorrell. Rainstorms and flashes, brilliance of mind, send the creator who ideas entwine. Wizards and witches, skeletons bony, send in the Baxter, the man we know as Tony.
That's a good look for you.
Okay.
Merry Christmas, Mr. Scrooge.
Yeah. And isn't that coming out at Christmas?
Exactly. I can't really comment about clothes, considering that my wardrobe's by the Gap. I don't know if anyone noticed. So, do we have any Haunted Mansion fans in the house? Probably just as well, because if you didn't care for it, I'd say your time and money would probably be better spent elsewhere. Welcome. I've actually had the privilege, as some of you hopefully know, of writing a book about the Haunted Mansion. So it's my great pleasure tonight to be here with Kim and Tony to talk about a subject that's near and dear to all of us. And you actually have a very special connection to the mansion. Why don't you tell us about that?
I do.
My James lived in a moment.
What is your mother's name?
I'm done. You like the pants?
Now, well, of course, Mom is Leota Toombs Thomas, the famous Madame Leota, the Haunted Mansion. You may or may not know that Mom was actually one of the first women of the model shop. She and Harriet Burns and Gunnar von Kessel and Doris Carlson were part of the very first team of women in the model shop that created all of the classic attractions that we know and love today. She was a model builder and a painter, a very good sculptor. In those days, the people in the model shop did everything. And these are some pictures of her behind us. That's Mom working on Small World, if you've never seen her without her Haunted Mansion makeup on. And this is us, the opening day of Disneyland. That's my sister and I with her up by the train station on opening day. She was really very beautiful. And then this is Mom over here with Claude Coates, her very special friend and also the set designer for a lot of Haunted Mansion. And so I wanted to tell you a little story about when Mom was working in the model shop, and it was a very small little group of people then, and they did a lot of different things, you know, helping each other out, wore a lot of different hats, so to speak. And one day, Gail Gracie came in and he told her all about this idea he had for this crystal ball with this lady's head in it that would be the medium, that would kind of be the seance medium of the special room there. And he said, I just want to try it out. And Blaine's going to do a head, and we're going to see how the projection works, and we just want to try it. And you've got nice high cheekbones, and so why don't you come and we'll do this thing. So Blaine did the life mask of her, and that was quite a story in itself, but it took several tries to get this goo just the right thickness to stick to her face and such. And then she had to go home and she had to learn an incantation, the whole thing, even though they thought they'd probably use somebody else's voice, because Mom had a very high little girl's voice. When she answered the phone, most people would go, "Is your mommy home?" And so I was, I think I was in about 6th grade, and I came home from school, and I heard this person in our house going, "Creepies and crawlies." What is that? My sister was home. We thought, what is going on? And we went down to her bedroom, and here she was, sitting in front of the mirror, doing that over and over again so that she could get the facial inflections and stuff just absolutely perfect with the voice. So she also did the little Leo at the end, and that is her voice because it has that little tiny voice that goes with that little tiny figure. And it's kind of funny nowadays because Mom passed away in 1991. And whenever I bring my girls, ever since they were little, we'd be going up that escalator and I'd go, "There's Grandma, wait." And all the people around us would be going, "What a weirdo."
I have a thing to add to that because I worked with Leota in the model shop at Imagineering when I first started. And it was always, she was a celebrity, you know, because she was in the Haunted Mansion. So when we give our tours around the room, we'd come to Lee's desk, and she really didn't like it very much. We could say, now Leota here is the lady in the crystal ball at Disneyland, and she also does the voice at the end of the ride. And then she'd say hello, and she had a very gracious voice, and then people would say, "That doesn't sound like you." And then everyone, Leota would reply back, she'd say, "Well, I don't go around talking like Bernie, you know, that was funny. Yeah.
And Tony, you also have a special connection to Claude.
Yes. Yeah, but it goes back earlier than that. I was working here at Disneyland, and I snuck into the pirate ride. And I remember we were at lunch, and I was working at Carnation, and a friend of mine didn't have the same nerve I did. So as I got down into where the guys are in prison down there near the end of the ride, I looked back up and I waved goodbye to my friend because Claude had just signaled me and said, "Well, you can't see anything from up there. Why don't you come down here at the track?" And Claude had been there installing the show because he was one of the art directors on it. I got an hour and a half personally guided tour of the pirate ride. And when I got back, I was talking to my pay, and I said, "I don't care, I just died and went to heaven," you know. Anyway, so I had in my mind that now that Haunted Mansion, there was a word out. I was now in operations here. There was a word out that they were testing the figures and the special effects for the first time this day in Disneyland. And I thought, all right, I'm going to see if I can strike a Vader twice in a row on this. So I went over there, and I knew where there was a door on the side. It turns out one of those doors in the corridor where the doors are all hanging, one of those is a real door that goes outside. You're not supposed to know that. And anyway, I peeked in that door, you know, and here I was looking into this amazing thing for the first time in my life, you know. And so I closed the door discreetly, and I went, "This is going to happen. I'm going to have that magic happen again." And I walked down to where the clock was ticking, and on that corner, right as you see Madame Leota, I did not get to the point where you could see your mom's face. I was almost there, and I felt somebody grab me by the scruff of the collar. Only it wasn't Claude Cooks this time, it was security. I ended up over in security trying to explain my way out of that one. But I did later work with Claude, and literally he became my mentor at WI. We didn't realize we were the same two people that had that moment in Paris until about 10 years later, and then it dawned on both of us.
But when you were experiencing the Haunted Mansion during the early days of customer previews, you actually got to see
Oh yes, I got to go on the ride for 4 hours. Now, imagine if you found out that they said, "This is going to be quite an ordeal, and we don't want anyone to volunteer for it unless you can go 4 hours to ride the ride." Now, been sitting there in you know, that side of New Orleans Square since 1963 with nothing going on other than a sign out front. And then word comes out that if you'd like to sign up for this, you could ride the ride for 4 hours, but you know that's a lot. So you know, I'm sure not very many of you will want to do this. So, anyway, so I came in on my day off. It happened to be my day off, and I got all the way over there, and they said, "Oh, it's only people that are in costume that are working today, because we have to pay you for this arduous assignment." And so I ran back to wardrobe and put my costume on. Now, the cool thing was every time we got to the seance, we could talk about what we had seen. You know, so it was amazing. The ride was about 6 minutes going around, and so every time we get there, I'd say, "Look in the attic, see if you can see the," you know. And so the amazing thing about that ride, it was the 1 week, this was leading up to opening day, that the Hatbox Ghost was actually in the ride. So he was a part of it. We got to see him there. And later, when we were making a disc a couple years ago, the Secret Stories of Magic, I was able to get Roberta, who works here in the main exhibition, to pull out a card from the racks in the back that had Hatbox Ghost listed on it. So proof positive that he really was there.
It's interesting because that was actually one of the things that motivated the book 6 years ago, was all of the myths and urban legends of people just having rabid opinions about what did and didn't happen. And getting to the bottom of those stories, I think this was some of the most fun I had doing the book, getting with you to talk to you about your mom. And, you know, I saw Exitensio earlier today, and he'll be here later tonight. I think that's one of the most amazing things for us as Imagineers. I mean, I know you guys got to work with them directly, but for me, most of them have retired by that time. So to get to sit with X and Harriet and Wayne and everybody to hear the stories firsthand, it's really been amazing. But the funny thing is, some of these things kind of vanish into the mists of time. So like you can ask some of them about the Hatbox Ghost or you know, any number of other things. And the funny thing is, having worked at Imagineering for 10 years plus now myself, I think back to things I worked on, and I can't remember what we didn't do or what was said in a meeting. And the Haunted Mansion seems to have so many of those types of things. Like in Florida, one of the big ones is, was there a guy in the spider web? Was there a corpse in the spider web? And, I found out firsthand from Tommy Rudowski down there who installed the ride that it never went in, but there is paperwork that lists it as a prop. So obviously it was one of those things that fell by the wayside.
Well, speaking of going into the Haunted Mansion, you are in the Haunted Mansion at certain times of the year. And yes.
That's right. When entertainment decided they wanted to do a Night Before Christmas overlay, Steve Davison came to me and he said, "Ken, we're going to have to redo that incantation because we want to have a new one that goes with our new show. And either you can do it or we're going to hire an actress to do it." I thought, I'm afraid to do that. I'm kind of shy, but I don't want anyone else to do it either.
And we can tell you're shy. Yeah. Takes no interest in this guy.
So I went through the same process. That was so interesting because everything that she talked about doing, having her head, attached to the chair so she didn't move because the projection had to stay perfectly still. And the whole process of doing the life mask and makeup and all of that, we went through the whole thing all over again right here in our model shop here at Disneyland. And John Gritz, our wonderful creator, who's like a Yale Gracie himself, like a young Gracie, he figured the whole thing out, and we did the incantation. And so I'm in there for the Christmas holiday, and oddly enough, when they did the new life mask, technology has better materials now, so it came out a lot, the mold is a lot crisper. So when they put that head in there, they said, man, we can get a really good projection on that. Let's try Leona's projection on Kim's sculpt. And it fit perfectly. We have exactly the same bone structure. So now, during the rest of the year, they project Mom's image on my head. She would have loved that.
So you're both kind of eternally joined.
Exactly. I think she would like that.
It's funny because like a lot of people ask me what is the one thing you're most proud of that you've done at Walt Disney Imagineering? It's funny because for me, not having Big Thunder Mountain Splash Mountain, Star Tours, Indiana Jones Adventure, things like that, for me it's actually one of the relatively small things, and it's an enhancement that we did a few years ago with the Living Tombstone at the Haunted Mansion in Florida. And the reason it's so special to me is we finally got to give your mom her tombstone. She never had one out there. So when we were brainstorming, you know, what's the tombstone going to be? What's the epitaph going to be? In the meeting, we had said, well, we really ought to go with one of the well-known characters in the show so we can get that additional connection. And obviously, Madame Leota is really the only character that people know by name. And then, but immediately it occurred to us that that would also give us the opportunity to give Leota her tombstone that she didn't have before. So as I walk through the park, I see my little tombstone next to all of the ones that X did. I think that's probably the thing I'm most proud of, you know, since I've been an engineer.
I think one of the earliest things Kim and I worked on together that we had was the Pet Cemetery.
That's right.
I think the movie had come out and we said, ooh, that would be so neat. And we started thinking about all the little tombstones you could create, you know, like, I think I saw a Charles Adams cartoon where he had a little girl who looked demonic. And she had all her dead animals buried around her. And the parents are saying, isn't it great that Becky loves funerals, you know? You know? And so we thought about, remember that we had the cat and all the dead little birds around it?
Yeah,
you know?
he's sitting all perched
yeah.
up with all these little bird headstones around.
Yeah, so that was really kind of a fun thing. That was our kind of entree into what we call adding magic or new magic to the show.
And enhancing the queue, so when people were waiting in line for something.
There was an experiment in the mid-'80s with that type of thing. What can you tell us about the suit of armor, the living suit of armor?
Oh, yes. Randy Bright and I had gone to a little thing across town in another park. Another closet freak for it, too. It's opening in about 4 weeks, but we won't advertise somebody else's product. And they did all kinds of live things that come out in the dark and everything. And it's really stimulating if you've been there. Anyway, so we thought, let's see if we can put a figure in Haunted Mansion. But everybody expects everything in Disneyland to be amazingly controlled. And almost the rhythm to the Haunted Mansion of this happens. It's almost kind of part of the adrenaline of it. And anything that was out of step really comes off odd. So you're getting into the cadence of this thing, and midway through the ride, we had a guy in armor that was next. There's still a audimatronic knight in the hallway there, but we had next to him on the other side a real knight. And so everything is going just right, and then you turn, and this guy stepped out, and I mean, we literally had people fly out of the seats. They were so frightened. And what we realized, it was that sense of being lulled into a security thing there, that when suddenly something breaks from the rules, it was almost traumatic. And it was still good until one day, a guy, in order to protect his date, I guess, on the thing, just hauled off, got up out of the thing, and punched the guy out. And he came out and said, that's it, I'm done, I'm not going back.
It wasn't an isolated incident. My family had just moved out to Southern California that year, or in 1984, and I had grown up with the mansion in Florida, so I remember riding the Haunted Mansion for the first time with my mom, who's a nervous woman under the best of circumstances. So again, we're going through the ride thinking we know, oh, this is just like the one in Florida for the most part, we know exactly what to expect. And I don't know what knight was working that day, but he actually reached into the car and grabbed her. Oh, no. And she popped at one right in the, she screams at the top of her lungs and just pops at one right in the face. So I don't blame her for the disappearance. I don't think she helped him. And what can you guys tell us about some of the more recent enhancements? Because the Haunted Mansion has actually gotten the lion's share of some of the new magic.
Well, actually, you put a lot into Florida most recently.
Yeah, actually, we got to, one of the other things I'm most proud of is I was the show writer for our 2007 enhancement that we did in Florida, where we actually got to put in an entire new scene, the Endless Staircase, which is one of our What, you didn't like the rubber spiders? What? But it's funny because, you know, we had so many meetings about what that scene was going to be, and we went back and forth, and we had talked about creating entire new rooms, and we were really intrigued with the notion that this had been a location in the mansion that had always been there, but it had finally materialized to humanize. And we actually returned some, like a lot of the things that we do, return to some of the original source material. And I think in the, we just put out a new edition of the Haunted Mansion book for the 40th anniversary, which is available at Amazon.com. Find retailers near you.
And it's hard, I think. So.
And actually, they should be settled here. No? They are?
Good.
I'm glad we had this moment. So we actually returned to some of the original Ken Anderson drawings, which in one of them actually showed stairs going every which way. The Winchester Mystery House was a big inspiration.
Ken started on this in 1957, and
yeah.
it didn't materialize here for 12 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it was really, again, kind of a highlight of my career to actually not just write about something, that I loved, but to actually contribute to it. And it's funny that I know a lot of our creative executives felt that whatever we did in there should be very architectural in nature. So that was another reason that we thought, the stairs going every which way. I remember in one meeting I tried to sell them on the idea. Tony, you actually were the first person to tell me about this. That the composition that you hear throughout the ride, during the Ghost, you hear it in a different arrangement. Every time you go through the ride, you have the funeral dirge at the beginning, and the Rachmaninoff version in the ballroom, and the graveyard, the kind of swinging version of the graveyard. Well, I thought, what if we did a nursery rhyme version, and on one of the flights of stairs, we had like a little ball bouncing and jacks moving up and down, and we had, children doing kind of a sing-songy version of it. I got a couple of looks and say, dead kids probably isn't the way. I didn't say anything wrong with it.
I had a funny footnote to their additions down there. I don't know if it was at exactly the same time, but you may know that they took out the toad ride in Florida and put in Winnie the Pooh.
What?
Yeah. So in the little cemetery there, way in the back, is a stone carving of a toad. Rest in peace. Well, I was being shown the Haunted Mansion new effects and everything. They took us outside and said, well, this was kind of a throwaway. I know it wasn't worth the money. No one's ever going to see it. But if you look way in the back there, you can see this toad. As this was being said, a family came up. And the leader of the group was saying, you've got to come over here and see the final resting place, the Mr. Toad. So he said, point approved.
No, but it was really a thrill to work on that enhancement, and even subtle little things like the living eyes and the wallpaper. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is the fact that you can actually hear the stretch through the stretching now. I think it's just this creepy, ominous addition to it that really helps sell the gag. But I remember riding through it for the first time after getting to work on it, and I think that was the time I felt most like an engineer, when you actually ride through something that you got to contribute to. It's an unbelievable feeling. So what was that like? Our resident,
We did. We changed the attic to have a little bit more of a story. I know Tony and I were talking about this earlier, that all of the attractions at Disneyland weren't really intended to have succinct stories that went from one thing to the next to the next. It was, and John Hench's talked about that too. It's not a story, they're just kind of vignettes in a house that you get to happen to see into.
And that are so amazing, you couldn't see them anywhere else on Earth.
Right, yeah. And so the idea of going through the attic, I think, for them, having the ghosts pop up out of the boxes and things was fun. It was pretty, a surprise scare. But we did try to put a little bit more of a story to it with that bride that had gone through many husbands and kept gaining wealth as she went along. And we had a lot of fun with that. The bride itself was done up at Imagineering at the R&D and Special Effects Department. That our office actually did all the cropping and the pictures that changed with the heads, losing their heads and such, and cropping each one to tell the story of each husband as she marries a wealthier and wealthier. The wedding gifts become more and more extravagant, and like the husbands that she's married.
Cool. That sort of, the whole bride thing sprung from something that came out of Paris. When we went over there, first of all, the majority of the Europeans had trouble with funny, scary. They want scary, then they want funny, but they don't want funny, scary. That doesn't make any sense. So somehow it works here. And anyway, so we had to rethink it. And
it didn't work in the movie either.
Yeah. So there's a fantastic...
I was kidding!
It's been recorded, so... Yeah, it'll be on all the...
Can we talk about how much I love Eddie Murphy's work?
John Wayne, it's the Southwest. The nuances of having the Kentucky area and the Mississippi area and all that being west. Over there, it's much more of a rarefied, Dodge City and the Rio Grande and the Monument Valley. So we got a whole lot of changes in Frontierland, and it turns out that Big Thunder has become the #1 ride over there. It doesn't hurt that you go under the water and up to the island. But we put the ghost house up on the hill, the Haunted Mansion, it's called Phantom Manor over there, because if we had translated Haunted Mansion in French, it would be Maison de Haunt or something like that. My bad French, but you wouldn't be able to read that in the other languages. So we opted to go with Phantom Manor. And then we looked at what was going on. First of all, the Phantom of the Opera was big at that time. This was in the early 90s. And Pierre Lachaise is the most incredible graveyard in the world, which is in downtown Paris. It's kind of the site for that portion in the play Phantom of the Opera in the second act. And I mean, everyone is buried there, and it's quite an experience to go. And so this is part of the fabric of their lives. So part of the joy of doing these things is bringing a different flavor to each place we go. So they're not replication. Each time we rethink it, to give it its own flavor. So in Paris, it's a Western, almost boomtown house that would have been built out of the gold rush, only to fall into decay after all the gold panned out. And so we did extend the bride story throughout it. So we watched her literally from the beginning of the ride to the end, getting more and more decrepit. And we passed through the Mrs. Havisham stage all the way into the afterlife. So when we leave the house, we don't go out of the attic. We literally fall into a grave and then enter kind of an underground for the end of the ride, which took it in a very different direction. And it's very European. And a lot of people have feelings about which way we should go, whatever. But it was funny. When John Lasseter was over there the first time, he was brought through, and they were kind of beating him on to authorize some changes in it to bring it more like the stateside ones. And the girl that was hosting him, she said, "We are so proud of our Haunted Mansion. It is so French, and we really like it this way much better than the ones in the United States." So it really shows you how you have to be kind of in tune with where you're going, because unlike a film that plays internationally, we're going into kind of a local market, and you have to really put a spin on it that works for each of the different places. We had recorded Vincent Price to do that narration, and unfortunately he kind of just passed that last point in his career where he could do French in the way that we wanted it. I think on hindsight I would have had a recorded narration in English, and because it would have been America, and the same way we like hearing French accents for a romantic reason, I'm sure that they would like hearing an American accent just to give it kind of the proof of being the West.
That same reasoning kind of applies to the Tokyo version of the house too, and why it's in Fantasyland, because for the Japanese they kind of lump those stories together, fairy tales and
there was a park called Nara Dreamland that was an absolute copy of Sam McKim's map of Disneyland. And if any of you have that historic map, it had Liberty Square and Edison Square on it. And they built those lands, so you could actually go to them in this park. But when you went into Fantasyland, the Peter Pan ride had all these people hanging on meat hooks. And see, more to the same Peter Pan vehicle, and away it went. And then there were these people on meat hooks. And I was shocked and surprised. And it turned out that that's a very, very famous legendary fairy tale story. So that's, again, why they had chosen to do that. But, it really set my mind to wondering, what are we going to do in that market?
Well, it's interesting because it almost seems like in many ways the Haunted Mansion story devolved a little bit from the earlier ones, because all of the early Ken Anderson treatments were actually fairly detailed in terms of the storytelling. And then I remember when I was interviewing Marty when I was talking to X about the script, I'm like, well, how did you finally land on what the story was going to be? And he goes, I'll never forget this. He just kind of looked off into space. He goes, it was that sign. And I'm like, what sign? It was that sign Marty wrote about a retirement home. We almost didn't have a choice. We had to make it a retirement home. And that came from Walt's original interview with the BBC, where he said he was going to build a retirement home for ghosts where they could come from all over the world and kind of do what they do best for their retire. after it. But it's funny because people ask me all the time, well, what is the story? I just did an interview earlier, and that was the first story. And you can basically boil it down to, well, it's a retirement home for ghosts. And it's funny, especially as a writer, to think that, especially during that period, they really didn't tell very elaborate stories. And Walt came out and said, well, we're not really telling linear stories that go from A to B to C. And X has that great anecdote about pirates where they looked at the mock-up for the first time. It was a little bit jumbled, and he kind of sheepishly went to Walt and said, oh, we can't really understand what they're saying, I'm sorry. And Walt was like, no, this is great. It's like going to a cocktail party where you just drift from one little pocket of conversation to another, and you pick up these stories as you go along. The Haunted Mansion is almost kind of, especially with the debate between fun and scary, and the Mark Davis influence versus the Claude Coates influence, it kind of became a happy accident that has a very well-defined story. And Tony, you actually pointed out to me the first time the structure that it has.
Yeah, I'm working with Claude very closely, and a lot with Marcus Kim did too. You see how the guys work, and when they were together, they created Pirates and Haunted Mansion and all that. But when Walt had gone and they wanted to be their own creators, you got out of Mark, who was driven by amazing storytelling and characters and so forth, Deliver the Mary Sings and Country Bear Jamboree, and Claude, who loved environmental experiences, created like Adventures from Inner Space and If You Had Wings and things like that. Very, very different approaches to things. I guess I would say I really loved the environmental things, or at least it was my upbringing too, to do with environmental experiences like Claude did. So I was fascinated to see that since Walt had passed away 3 years before the Haunted Mansion opened, you can almost see like they no longer had to work together, so Claude took over the first half, and then Mark more or less became, not that you don't find parts of Mark and parts of Claude in both halves, but it's almost like they felt comfortable in their areas. And as I was working with Claude go off on the 10-year, I really loved the movie. I don't know if any of you've seen it from the early 60s, 62, called The Haunting with Claire Bloom and Julie Harris. It's a great movie. Well, I was really badgering Claude because it said everything in the first half of the ride has reflections of that. The wallpaper, the doors that are coming and everything. And he said, well, if you won't tell anybody, we went and saw that film about 4 times. And so to wander here for a minute, I'm driving through England, minding my own business. And that movie is in, up in North New England is where the setting of it is. The character, Julie Harris, drives out of New York to go up there. So I'm in England, near Shakespeare's Stratford-on-Avon. Driving along, over here in the woods is the most amazing haunted type house you have ever in your life seen. So, pull off the road, drive up, turns out it's sort of a gentleman's retreat thing, and they do have rooms and all that, so I check in. I'm going up the stairs with my luggage, and the guy says, oh, so would you like the ghost tour at 12:30 tonight? Yeah, that sounds great. Looking at all these portraits of all these weird, evil people looking at you as you're going up the stairway. So we come down, it's now dark, we go out in the front yard, and of course all the color is gone. It's essentially black and white under this stark moonlight and all that. And this 85-year-old butler that comes out of retirement each night to do this thing has a lantern. And I'm going, this
and
is
a lonely dog.
Yeah, and a dog. And he lights up the front of his house and he goes, now perhaps some of you have seen this house in a great movie that was done long ago called The Haunting by director Robert Wise. And I about died because I'd seen it in color out of that Cotswold stone in the afternoon. Of course, the movie's black and white. So suddenly, I was now in Nirvana. I had found back the Haunted Mansion, and then the fact that it was tied back with Claude, that they literally watched it and watched it. So if you haven't seen that movie, not the new one, the other great
not the 1999 version.
Made by
You've Been Warned.
Yeah, you've been warned. Not that one, but the original.
I figured I'd try to neighbor if I'll go after Liam Neeson.
Yeah, but that new one wasn't done by our company, so I can say it.
Actually, it was done by DreamWorks, so kind of close. DreamWorks, Marvel, tomorrow the world. We see something that's successful, we buy it. It's a good It's interesting though, because if you watch the 63 version of The Haunting, you can totally see the Haunted Mansion. And like, when I go through the Haunted Mansion now, you can totally see Hill House. So it's really interesting, and it's a great.
And Claude said what was great about that, it's not what you see, it's what you imagine in that film. And I think that's why I kind of like that first part of Our House, where it's, you know, it's really drawing it out of you. And you can almost feel the butterflies in your stomach wondering what's going to happen next. You know,
and the movie has a subtlety to it that you just don't see in films today. It's probably easily one of the greatest ghost stories ever done.
And another thing, you talk about the mechanics of the Haunted Mansion. The odd maneuver is almost dead silent. No pun intended there. But, you know, compared to like how noisy, like Peter Pan ride, I shouldn't put something down, it's one of my favorite rides, but the ride system is pretty noisy while you're in there. Your brain tunes it out, but in the Haunted Mansion, when they turn those on and off, if you've ever been in when it slows down, you don't even know. It's almost ghost-like as it just flows through. So what a perfect thing to set the stage for that kind of emotion.
This is another little tangent, but it's kind of a funny story. The first time I actually met Tony after working for Imaginary was at another kind of famous haunted location. Back in 2000, we were working on the special effects show, the Backlot Tour. We thought we're going to do, you know, a Pearl Harbor theme thing. And someone at Imaginary in Florida had found a vendor in Colorado somewhere that can do basically binaural sound, the three-dimensional sound, but without the headphones. So we thought, okay, well, we'll travel out there and we'll get to see this. And I said, well, where is it? And they said, oh, it's right near Boulder. And I said, oh, that's great. We should stay at the Stanley Hotel, which is what inspired The Shining. So they listened to me, and we booked the hotel, and we fly in. It come to find out the vendor was about an hour and a half away from the Stanley Hotel, so I'm getting all kinds of looks and complaints. And the great thing is we're driving through the mountains, getting to the Stanley, and I pop in the soundtrack from the film. Driving along these mountain roads, and you turn, and there's the Stanley. I'm like, oh my God, it's the Overlook. And they said, well, you know, Tony Baxter is going to be meeting us out here tomorrow. And I'm like, for what? And I'm like, well, he heard that this was the Shining Hotel, so you know he's going to come out and check it out too. And then I remember we were having lunch, and you told the story about visiting the Hill House in England. I'm like, what kind of job does this cat have? I didn't know. He goes from one haunted hotel to another, working.
By the way, that was called, the other one is called Eddington Manor, if any of you are Haunted Mansion junkies, so it's fantastic. Got 125 a night.
Is this orbit season? I don't know what the Stanley rates are, but I'm sure you can find it.
You know, an interesting thing about the style of the mansion, though, doing some of the Haunted Mansion shows for the Disney Gallery, Rolly Crump had a huge influence on the styling also. And a lot of Ken Anderson's things that he did really early on. I mean, we found old.
I like the unsung heroes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam McKen had a lot of styling in there as well. And Exitencio didn't just write the song, he did a tremendous amount of sketches and drawings for different gags and things that were in there.
You're right, there's a Rolly Crump sketch of a fish tank with skeletal fish in it. And I will go on record here, I'm going to get that before I retire. And then we have that in there. It's just such a good idea, and I know exactly how to do it.
Well, if you've ever seen the sketches of his museum of the weird that have the clocks and the weird bone chairs, and they did a wonderful sketch of the seance scene with the, you know, crystal ball and everything.
Yeah, he had a huge influence on the seance scene. One of the most controversial things that came out of the book was like everybody, I thought Mark Davis did the wallpaper, so that's the way we described it. And then I interviewed Rolly, and he goes, you know, that's my wallpaper.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, it's like decades later, these guys are still irritated about things that's happened, you know, ages ago.
Well, as Rolly was younger, he was, you know, one of the young guys when Mark and Claude were in their prime. And they had put his version behind the door in the conference room where Walt was brought in to see everything. They had kind of monopolized the whole meeting, and then Walt said, well, this is all good, you know, I've seen everything, right? And I said, yeah, cool, yeah, that's pretty good. And of course, Rolly had his chance, and then Walt is walking out, he goes, wait a minute, what's all this stuff over here behind the door? And then Rolly brings it out, and Walt just gets totally engrossed, and that's where the concept of the Museum of the Weird got born. But the story is fantastic because this was, you know, like in the afternoon, say Tuesday. So Rolly comes to work on Wednesday morning, and there's Walt in the same outfit that he was in at the meeting the night before. And not go home last night. I've been, I couldn't sleep. I had to think, where am I going to use this? And I figured it all out. We're going to do this Museum of the Weird, and you're going to be on the TV show next month to tell about it. So, of course, then Rolly got a big smile, and then when you hear Rolly tell, he goes, and everybody else got a big smile about how good my work was all of a sudden at that point.
It's great. He told me that story when I interviewed him, and he said Walt was like kind of agitated about it. He goes, Rolly, that was some really weird stuff you showed me yesterday. And he didn't say stuff. He goes, I couldn't sleep a week all that. Rolly's got some of the greatest stories that I can ever tell. One of them, and it's not Haunted Mansion related, but this is the most hysterical thing I have ever heard. He talked about how he went with Walt and a group of people on the first mock-up of It's a Small World, which I think was at the studio. And Mark Davis was there. They were just kind of going from scene to scene. As the tour started, Mark said, Walt, I think we missed a country. And Walt's like, huh? And he's like, we didn't do Luxembourg. I really feel that and Walt's like, yeah, fine, Luxembourg, let's go. And so they get about halfway through the tour, and Mark brings it up again. And he goes, Walt, I can't get this out of my mind. I really think we need to find a way to get Luxembourg in here. And Rolly's telling the story in an amazing way. And he said Walt started to get agitated. And I'm like, yeah, Mark, Luxembourg, I get it. Okay, come on, we'll move on. So we get like about 3/4 of the way through, and this is the way Rolly tells it. He goes, so Mark leans forward, tugs on Walt's jacket. He goes, Walt, I really feel strongly that we need to do Luxembourg. And this is exactly Rolly's quote. Well, the old man turned around. The eyebrow went up, and he said, Mark, no one gives a about Luxembourg. I thought that would be the greatest T-shirt ever. No one gives an S about Luxembourg. Walt Disney, 1964. Rolly's a trip. If you ever get to meet Rolly Crumb, just buy him a drink and sit back and But he had mentioned, that he had actually come up with the first designs for the wallpaper. You can totally see his influence, and I mistakenly attributed it as a collaboration between him and Mark, but then later he said, no, it was Claude. Claude worked with me on it and refined it a little bit, so that's one of the corrections.
Well, and again, it was such a big part of that movie, it was like when she woke up, there was that face and the...
Yeah, the thing about Hill House is it's always watching you. There's statuary everywhere, just eyes in the wallpaper, or scenery
Carvings on the fireplace.
Exactly.
Little cherubs that turn evil.
Kim mentioned earlier about, Walt not wanting to overtell the story, that to leave a lot for the guests to interpret and make up and debate, and why are we all here tonight? Because, we all love thinking of these different stories. But when the ride opened, there was a lot more narrative in it, and a lot of other characters that had bigger roles, like the crow that's barely seen in the ride, had a big role in the first few weeks of operation. But like 3 location shows, Pirates, for every scene in the cavern, there is a dialogue track that was originally recorded for that. And Small World had the national anthems and everything. But one of my favorites is having a friend that worked in audio here back when I was scooping ice cream. I said, what would be the possibility of you getting those tracks and putting something together that we can listen to? And so I have somewhere in ancient history this thing where all throughout the ride we have comments from the crow. And whoever they got to act the role of that crow must have just been reading, caw, caw. He took the coward's way out. Caw.
That was something X talked about too. He said he was talking about the crow recording, and I said, oh, well, why didn't you guys use more of that? And he said, well, it got obnoxious after a while. I was listening to this bird talking at you.
Well, that was actually an improvement when we went in, and that was gone. But there were a couple that were really neat, because there's one that introduces Madame Leota. She has a remarkable head for assembling the disembodied. And then you went into your whole thing.
It's funny because some of that narration wound up on the story album. Because I remember things when I was growing up listening to the album over and over and over again. And then when I got to go back and finally look at some of X's scripts and how it got refined through the various drafts, a lot of the early drafts had a lot of that material. So it was interesting to see how it kind of got repurposed for the record album. And then in your mind, it kind of blurs together after a while, and you think you remember things from the ride, but it's because as a kid you listen to this record album 45,000 times.
I couldn't stand Opie taking us through the Haunted Mansion.
I know it's such I mean, have you guys seen that box set that they just put out? It's absolutely
a must.
Yeah, it's like,
yeah.
I tried to explain.
We can all be kids again, because we bought it for like $2.99, and now
yeah,
I get $100.
Exactly. That's quite the markup.
Yeah, but we're children again, so it's perfect. Yeah.
So Kim, what's it like being kind of actually both of you, Kim is the resident art director and Tony is the portfolio leader. What's it like being kind of the stewards of Disneyland after having spent so much of your lives working with this special place?
Well, that's an interesting question for me since I'm like a Disney brat. I grew up at Disneyland. I mean, Mom, my dad was an animator at the studio, and Mom being with Imagineering, with Imagineer for as long as I remember. I can't imagine working any place else. I think I always knew I was going to be here. But it's the history of walking through the park and remembering all of the times that I've spent with my family and then with the art directors that I've been lucky enough to work with through the years, Mark Lucas and John Hinch and Herbie and such. It's really wonderful. I just can't imagine it any other way, actually.
Well, I've had a chance to work all around, and I kind of philosophically see, Walt Disney World is spectacular, and Paris is probably the most beautiful part, but this is the most charming. And charm is really hard to compete, because it's so precious and so fragile. It's easy to make it grand. Not easy, but it's easier. And to try and keep this park, it was designed before we knew how to move crowds, really. It was designed for 4 or 5 million people a year, and we're now doing 14 million people a year. But that's the magic of it, the smallness and the charm of it, and the people scale. And I always say I'm looking for, 2 ways to get people to the same place rather than one big wide way, And for me, like, the challenge I think was best solved once with the Paris and Caribbean Bridge. They had come to us and they said, our industrial engineering says at the Splash Mountain, the demands to get in and out of New Orleans Square is going to be so great. We're going to have to take out all the planters, all the trees, and just open it up so we'll have a large space to flow people. And then we came up with the idea of separating so that people waiting for pirates are downstairs and people that are going in and out are on another level, and we were able to add more trees. And so we won in solving the problem for Disneyland, but we did it by making it even more charming than it was before. And so those are always, I think, the challenges and then the rewards of doing it. People say, rank your achievements, and certainly and things like that. But when I look at that pirate bridge, I felt really special about it because we saved an area from getting kind of neutralized and kept it as beautiful, if not more beautiful than it was before.
Well, we learned a lot. I think Tony and I started in the late 60s, early 70s at Imagineering. We were able to mentor with all of the creators of these amazing attractions, and we were just kids back then. And I'm sure that we didn't realize it at the time, but Claude and Mark and John, all of those, Harper Goff, they would all come down into the model shop and work side by side, cutting out models and painting little things and sculpting. And all through that, they would share stories about why they did things a certain way, why Walt cut a pathway through here, why they created this, a certain way. As John used to say, it wasn't a lucky accident. And so the awesome responsibility of knowing that we are the ones now that need to carry on all that tribal knowledge, to share all that with the young Imagineers today is an amazing responsibility, and I feel so proud that we were able to work with those people and pass this on.
And along those same lines, what do you think it is about the Haunted Mansion? I mean, it's one thing. I mean, Disneyland has been around since 1955, but even with the individual attractions, we talked about Mr. Toad earlier, and Country Bear Jamboree is on. Things evolve, things change. Old things are taken out, new things are put in. In the case of the Haunted Mansion and Pirates, things are enhanced and kind of refreshed. But it's amazing to me sometimes when I think about things like the Haunted Mansion and Pirates that have just gone on for so long, 40 years for Haunted Mansion, 40 plus for Pirates. And movies don't run that long, TV shows don't run that long, Broadway shows don't run that long. What is it about something like the Haunted Mansion that keeps it so special, in people's hearts so many years later?
Well, I think, the thing about Disneyland is detail everywhere. When I was in college, I had convinced my professor to let me not design an opera, but to do an attraction in my portfolio at school for Disneyland. He said, well, that's not theater, that's not a show. And I said, it is. It's just a different type of theater. And you become the star. It's almost like the word virtual reality, which is overused today. These experiences, like the Haunted Mansion, are a virtual reality of the first order. And the difference, instead of you manipulating an avatar that's living inside your television screen, you are the avatar. It's the closest the everyday person can get to suddenly surrendering the comfort of the world they live in and entering into one of these incredibly virtual spaces that are unlike anything on the planet. So I think just by that very nature, whether it's a jungle cruise or it's going, I almost see the power ride as like descending into sleep. You cruise across the blue bayou, it's like that sleepy time where you're drifting away, then you plunge down into a world that isn't quite all to life yet, and then all of a sudden it opens up and it comes to life. And I think the Haunted Mansion is a similar thing, where you leave this world, and whether they knew what they were doing or it was just a happy accident, because there's no room to build a house on the inside of the berm, and they had to get you down in an elevator and then out to where there was a lot of room. And then we actually contrived that for Florida, because you don't need to have the elevator in Florida. We need it here. And but it separated you from the comfort of strollers and churros and all the things that are going on. And something odd is happening that's taking you out of that world, the same way that the Blue Bayou, when they removed the Blue Bayou from the Florida pirate ride. And so you're kind of thrown into it right away rather than having that experience. And that was something that I learned right away. And when we've done, like, say, Star Tours or Indiana Jones, we put a major to-do about leaving the world of Tomorrowland or Adventureland and moving away into this kind of place where you can suspend your disbelief and enter into this world. And I think the Haunted Mansion and Pirates were the granddaddies, the two that really set all of us, to understand that, or to be able to, be aware of that, make sure it was in the DNA of everything we do now. And I think probably because the haunted world is such a mystery that none of us will know. The only way we get to find out, none of us want to go through that. Yeah, at least. So this chance to be a voyeur into the afterlife is just sort of a primal thing, that it's the great unanswered question. And to do it, in a way where, like Eddie Sato coined this little, verse of fear minus death equals thrill. And if you think about it, all of us want the thrill. Nobody wants to go through that middle part, So if Disneyland could provide a way through the Haunted Mansion, through Pirates, through Indiana Jones, through all these experiences that gets us around that, we all love that thrill. And I think the Haunted Mansion does it extremely well. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here.
So sorry.
Oh no, we're just getting
Your
going.
time with us has expired. Your services are needed elsewhere.
Oh.
Well, that's a great note to wrap up on. I can think of no better note to end on than just the timeless appeal of the old dark house on the hill. And you guys joining us out here, probably from all over the country, to celebrate 40 years of the Haunted Mansion there's no greater proof than that. So thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the